Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our fourth session of our annual Rights of Way workshop. My name is Victoria, and I am the Habitat Program Manager of the Canadian Wildlife Federation's Rights of Way project, and I will be guiding you through our workshop today. I see that we have people who are still joining us. Oh, let's see here. Just going to fix my screen share as we still have everyone joining in. There we are. And as we do that, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping points and then we'll get started. Okay, so for everyone who's coming in, I'm just going to draw your attention to the black menu bar that's at the top or the bottom of your Zoom page. If you're having any audio issues, I just ask you to check those audio settings and ensure that your audio is connected to either your speakers or your headphone of your system. And if you're still having any troubles, maybe you can't see the presentation or if there's any audio issues, you can send us a message in the chat to the panelists or us, the presenters, and I'll do my best to find a way to help you out. You can also submit questions for our presenters through the question and answer function. So you will type them in, and I just ask that you be sure to indicate who you're asking the question to. And we will go through those questions and answers at the end of the presentation today. So we'll go through each presentation and we'll do those Q&As at the very end. So again, you can send us a message in the chat, but keep the questions for the question and answer function. So today we are really excited because we have a number of presenters who are joining us to share best practices from Canadian projects across the country. And we'll be beginning with Kathleen Law from Pollinator Partnership Canada and Andy Narezny from the Ontario Power Generation to talk about a project that was conducted in Cornwall. And then we'll be talking to Ethan Askey from the City of Calgary, Brian Reed from the Samuel Wilmot Nature Area in the municipality of Clarington, Lindsay Alward at the City of Oshawa, and Renee Roddick at BC Hydro. So I'm now going to pass things over to Kathleen and Andy to start things off for us.
Thanks, Victoria. I'm just going to start the PowerPoint presentation. How's that?
Everything looks great.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so thank you for the introduction, Victoria. My name is Kathleen Law with Pollinator Partnership Canada, and along with my counterpart, Andy Narezny from Ontario Power Generation, we're going to tell you about the process we embarked on over a year and almost 2 years ago to create a meadow of native plants of wildflowers in Eastern Ontario. So for a bit of context, Pollinator Partnership has been working with OPG, with Ontario Power Generation for 3 years on what I call their pollinator portfolio. And so OPG has quite a large commitment to a variety of environmental outcomes, including being a member of the Wildlife Habitat Council. And I presented at the very first ROAS Habitat workshop given by the Canadian Wildlife Federation back in 2019. And I know that Andy Narezny was an attendee there, as was his colleague, Jerry McKenna, who is a senior biologist with OPG. And so for the context, there's that corporate context where pollinator habitat and environmental outcomes are important for OPG. And then internally, there are these two champions that I like to say that I think are really instrumental in getting these kinds of projects advanced. So Andy and Jerry. As well as part of this context, there were some external partners, Pollinator Partnership for one, and a couple others, which we'll get to in a second. And then a third piece of importance, of course, was the site in question, which I will let Andy tell you about.
Yes, thank you, Kathleen. I just wanted to go on with what Kathleen said. That first right away workshop that was held in April of 2019 really inspired us at OPG to get started on this program. Out of a few different sites that this would work really well, and we picked this site at the Saunders generating station. It had an open area under a transmission line that was currently being mowed. It's adjacent to the station grounds. So you'll see this area here underneath the high voltage power lines, just adjacent to the station. It was a 1.47 hectares, or about 3.4 acres in area that we had picked out that would really prove well as a pollinator meadow. Previously, like I said, they were currently just mowing this area just for aesthetics. So we thought the picture there shows what it looked like prior to the project implementation. So it was just being kept as a mowed area and being a nice flat area underneath the power lines. It really fitted well into becoming a pollinator meadow. So we carried on with this project with Pollinator Partnership and approached the owners of the properties, which you'll see coming up here. I'll let you speak with this if you like, Kathleen.
Sure. So OPG was in charge of mowing the lawn, which, as Andy said, was a lot of work and not particularly productive or helpful beyond just having some ground cover. But Hydro One was actually leasing the land. So they were more in charge of it. And these are their hydro lines above, of course. But Hydro One was leasing from the St. Lawrence Seaway, who are the owners. So this was an interesting situation because it really was like quite a few big players and quite a few overlapping jurisdictions. Which brings us to the process. So given this context, unsurprisingly, there were quite a few months between our very first meeting to discuss it and getting all the approvals in place. So I had the pleasure of meeting Andy back in April 2019. And this was shortly after the CWF workshop, actually. And our conversation then was, how early can we seed? Can we seed this spring? And so there was that question and of course there was getting everyone else on board, namely Hydro One and the St. Lawrence Seaway. And I'll say that for Hydro One, that wasn't much of a problem because they also have a big interest and are active on the pollinator habitat front. So this wasn't anything new to them. This was, another opportunity to create pollinator habitat. St. Lawrence Seaway was interested, but this was also very new. So there were quite a few discussions back and forth. And so this is what the overall timeline looked like. And I'll let Andy speak to it a bit.
Yes, Kathleen's correct. There was a lot of communications that went back and forth between our real estate people, St. Lawrence Seaway, to gain permission. We submitted updated, revised plans all the way through the project as things change within the project on a timeline, or as far as the herbicide applications themselves. So we kept the Seaway informed, as well as Hydro One informed of our plan as it was revised. So there was a tremendous amount of communications going on between myself and Kathleen with updating the plan and resubmitting that to the key stakeholders, which are the Seaway and Hydro One. From what you can see in the timeline, we received our partner approvals. We proceeded with the first herbicide treatment, which was done in November of 2019. We then held it over to Pollinator Partnership to source the seeds, installed a time-lapse camera in 2020 to monitor the vegetation. We continued with second herbicide treatment and the mowing as prescribed by Pollinator Partnership. Updated our plans again, third herbicide treatment in the late fall of 2020. And then we continued with the site detaching and raking, which we used a Harley rake. Post Harley raking, once the weather was suitable, we were able to seed in the late December of 2020.
Yeah, so just recently.
Just recently, yes.
Yeah. So we'll speak a bit to the challenges that we face undertaking this process. So I think one of the big ones was timing, and that was on a few fronts. So definitely, there's a timing, for example, of applying for the Wildlife Habitat Council's certification, and so that's open once a year, and there was the initial desire to apply at the 2019 deadline for a 2020 designation, but that wasn't going to work with our site prep because we went back and forth a few times, but we determined it really would be, the best plan would be the best possible site preparation, which would be a full 3 herbicide treatments. So the timing there was to get one in the spring, one in the fall, and another one in the spring, just to make sure that we were going to get those plants that you do see more in spring and those that are more likely to appear in the fall. Because really, for the best success, you want that proper site preparation and get rid of as much of the weedy and encroaching species as you can. And then the other part of the timing, of course, had to do with the seeding, because with our native perennials, we want to seed in late fall or early winter around the first frost date. And that's going to really help trigger those seeds, go through the overwintering process and ensure the best germination rates possible. And so that was, so we had to, time in terms of the time of year, but also in December, Andy and his crew were keeping a really close eye on the weather forecast to find that time where it wasn't too rainy and wet that they couldn't drive the machinery over the field and create a mess, but also get it in time so that you could have a bit of a snow cover the seeds and protect them for predation. So there was a lot of very adaptive management, we can say, with this. The second challenge, and this is the one that I had to contend with on my end, was seed mix and sourcing. So I think for a lot of people who are doing this kind of work in Ontario, we have a good and growing native plant industry. But when it comes to sourcing commercial scale amounts of seed for these kind of landscape level projects, it's not easy as it hopefully will be one day, especially in Eastern Ontario. So most of the native seed industry is in Southwest Ontario and a bit in Central Ontario. So we could definitely find all the species we wanted that are native to Eastern Ontario, but the ecotypes were sourced from Southwest Ontario. And we had very few options in terms of where to get these seeds. Fortunately, we were able to work with a great company in Southwestern Ontario, and they helped us develop our seed mix. I also wanted to make sure to follow best practice as much as this context allows for, and that's to get genetic diversity. So in addition to getting about 80% of our seed from Ontario, I went to our neighbors to the south, and I went to Ernst to get some of the seed from the US. And that just means that we have genetic diversity, and that usually translates into a better establishment. So what that looks like is we had a total of 31 species, 70% of them being herbaceous. So all of those that you see highlighted are species that we also got from the States, from Ernst. So that means that for the yellow highlighted species, there are 2 different genetic sources. And we would have had more, but of course, with every harvest, every native seed harvest, sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. So we had to do a few switch arounds. Then our third challenge was the seeding method. And then again, I think this has to do very much with the fact that this is still relatively new practice in Eastern Ontario. So ideally, we would have a native seed drill, which would have allowed us to use a little bit less seed, and is usually just a more sure way of getting good seed to soil contact. But there is no native seed drill in Eastern Ontario right now. The closest ones are in Southwest and Central Ontario, and it was going to be expensive to bring them over to Cornwall, which is where the Saunders Generation Station is. And so I went back and forth with quite a few people looking into options, including with Hydro One, which had planned on getting a seed drill, but for COVID-related reasons was not able to this past year. And so Andy actually came up with the solution we used.
Yes, well, it was more of a solution from the site staff at Saunders. Working with them, one of the staff site members suggested the idea of, well, just using an ATV with a tow behind seed spreader, so where you'd be able to adjust the feed rate on it. We were just going to use his personal ATV. So that was fine. We were all planned, geared to go for that. And then he had noticed the side-by-side larger UTV that was used for salt spreading at the facility. Had a look at that, and he said, well, maybe that'll work for us too, is even better. It's a larger vehicle, a larger hopper. So we do have vermiculite on the site, which is used for oil spill cleanups for emergency use. So we're going to use the vermiculite as a carrier with the seed rate anyway. So we said, well, we'll use the vermiculite, fill the hopper, and do a few trial runs using the side-by-side and the salt spreader on the back, and adjust the feed rate to where we need it. So that's what we ended up doing, and it worked really well. We were able to weigh all the seed. Here, the pictures show us weighing each seed and mixing it up with the vermiculite in the drum. And the next slide will show us mixing it right in the hopper in the back of the UTV itself. So once we poured it into here, just to give it a little bit of mixing again in the back of the hopper and across the field, and with the same feed rate that we had experimented with. So this is actually on December 22nd of last year when we did the seeding. And this photo here is of that day. We did one pass across the field. We broke it down into quadrants to make it easier for the weight measurements of the seed, so we could focus on each quadrant of that 3.6 acres. So we worked with that, and we went one pass straight across, and then the second pass was done at diagonal to the first pass. So we have even coverage across the whole field. So there you'll see the UTV with the salt spreader on the back, dishing out the seed.
Yeah, and I'll draw everyone's attention to the light covering of snow on the field.
Yes.
And there was snow in the forecast for the next day, which is basically ideal conditions for this. So this brings us to where we are in the process now. Of course, now it's spring and we're crossing our fingers that all of this has worked well. We don't know yet. It's a bit of a pilot project, but yeah, we'll be hopefully presenting next year on how great a success it was. But in the meantime, we do have a few lessons that we've both taken away from this project.
For sure, yeah. The biggest one is to partner with professionals. When I first started entering into this myself, I'm not a plant ecologist. I more or less coordinate a lot of the biodiversity projects at OPG for Southeast operations. So for me, this was all new, other than what I could read off the internet, off of different sources. Tried to read up as much as possible, but then we partnered with Pollinator Partnership Canada, and they were able to provide us with all the direction we needed as far as seed sourcing, what to do. We did some soil testing prior to even planting. That came back, the pH was within acceptable limits, so we didn't have to add any thing to the soil itself, which was bonus. And then the scheduling. So scheduling was really paramount to make sure everything would work. When to mow, when to apply herbicide, and when to seed. And that was all on information provided by Pollinator Partnership. So that was excellent to partner with somebody that knows what they're really doing, that experienced this. That's highly recommended. And then make use of existing resources. We did have an existing contractor at our site at Cornwall that did some herbicide work for wild parsnip. We were able to add this herbicide application onto the existing contract, so we didn't have to send an RFP out and get another contractor on site and go through all the safety and paperwork involved with that. So that eliminated all that. That was rather easy to do. With vermiculite, again, I said we already had that on site. The UTV was on site. So try and make use of any of your existing resources and people as well. The staff at Saunders were really receptive to this idea, and were always very helpful with providing ideas on, well, how we could do this better, or how we could do this easier. So Get the staff involved as well. Let them know what you're doing, and the outcome of the project will be much easier to attain. Take the time to plan it and do it well. We initially tried to hopefully get it finished by 2019, and then apply for our Wildlife Habitat Council certification in 2020 after a full summer growing season, which didn't happen because just to get all the existing vegetation killed and seeded in 2019 really wasn't achievable, even though we had started in early April of 2019. We wanted to get that extra applications of herbicide, make sure everything, all the vegetation was killed, and that we removed all the scrub from the site, which was a better, looking back now, that was a better thing to do, is just take our time and let's do it well. And photos and monitoring before the project even started. Early 2019, we had a species at risk assessment conducted at the site to provide some baseline data on existing vegetation at the whole site, and really focus on pollinators. With the loss of habitat with pollinators across the world, really, and pesticides, it's one of our high priorities now. Is a lot of pollinator projects are springing up within OPG, and this being one of the first right-of-way projects that we have participated in. So we're really looking forward to see how this one's going to come out.
Yeah, and I'd reiterate what Andy said about making use of existing resources. And I think that was one of the really great things to come out of this project for OPG, is to start incorporating that internal capacity to establish and manage pollinator habitat. Andy hasn't yet mentioned one of, well, maybe I think it might be one of his favorite parts of all of this, but the time-lapse camera. So everyone has heard the old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So it's been set up, and so we have footage of what this lawn looked like before it was a meadow, and hopefully over the next several years, we'll be able to see how this meadow develops over time and establishes over time. And then very quickly, next steps is to continue training for local staff in this as a program that P2C has, Pollinator Steward Certification. And of course, there'll be monitoring of both the pollinator visits and the plant establishments. And we are developing a long-term management plan and hoping to take away the lessons we've shared with you and scale it to other OPG sites. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen and Andy. I already see in the chat that we have some who are sharing similar challenges that they're facing. So it's wonderful that you shared some of your solutions or how you're overcoming those. I also see that we have some questions coming in, but we're going to hold off on those until the end. And I'm going to pass things over to Ethan from the City of Calgary.
Hello, and thanks for the opportunity to share with you what we're doing in the City of Calgary. My name is Ethan Askey, and I'm with the Transportation Department in the City of Calgary. Calgary, for those of you who don't know, it's nestled next to the Rocky Mountains at the edge of the prairie, Canada's third largest city. And it's a city that is young, still building out, quite expansive. We have 16,000 lane kilometers of roadways here. And you get a sense driving around Calgary that it's a city of pathways, parkways, and golf courses. There's a fair bit of green and brown in late summer and fall months. And our city council has the desire for this to be, as a priority for Calgary to be, among other things, a healthy and green city. A bit of context in terms of ecosystem types. It's transitional in the parkland and grassland natural regions. Gives you a sense for some of the flowers that we are looking to establish in our roadways: some prairie coneflower and blue flags. The yellow line, I'll be speaking to a specific pilot project we've embarked on. The yellow line shows Trans-Canada Highway going west to east. And at the far east end or right side of the yellow line there, that's where we have a pilot project along 16th Avenue Northeast, Trans-Canada Highway, and where we're actually doing some conversion of turfgrass to urban meadow. I'll come back to that. This situates Calgary. It's very, as I mentioned, it's the very top end of the Great Plains ecoregion that extends all the way down to Mexico. Some of the plants that grow here are also mostly fescues and grasslands and a variety of flowering species plants. Calgary, outlined here on this graphic, is a city that has a fair bit of parks and natural areas set aside. They tend to be in the west side of the city, and the one largest green spot you see there is our Nosefield Park, one of the largest parks, urban parks in North America, and where we have grasslands represented. But we're looking at our roadways as potential additional open space to add some more habitat for pollinators. We have a biodiversity strategic plan for the City of Calgary, and transportation was part of developing that. And it calls for naturalization of a further 20% of our open space not yet in the parks system. So a lot of our parks are grassland, but they're not widely distributed, and we're looking at trying to build out the park system. Why us? Why transportation? Our Calgary Transportation Plan, dating back to 2009, actually has specific goals and objectives around biodiversity. So we manage energy because we have a transit system here and street lights and whatnot that are big draws on the electricity grid. A lot of diesel buses. We manage all sorts of pollution, water quality, water quantity, waste from our development activities and public waste. But we also manage biodiversity in the context of our transportation operations. So we have been forever conventionally managing most of our road rights of way, and those amount to about 1,000 hectares, which is really 1,000 soccer fields or football fields worth of land around the city that are under roads management as opposed to parks or others. And so we've been pretty conventional to date in our mowing of roadways 4 times a year for the most part. What we've been playing with for the past, well, really 15 years, we've been playing around the edges of this idea of roadside naturalization. We have done a number of small trial projects. Recently being involved with the Transportation Association of Canada and a pooled fund project that was national in scope, we've become more aware of other possibilities with our road rights of way beyond just managing our compliance obligations for weed control and aesthetics and keeping things trim. Turfgrass serves a variety of purposes, but we think that there's probably some additional value if we were to go beyond turfgrasses and introduce other grass species. We're looking for lower maintenance species and native where possible, and adding a flowering component. So we've been trying different things on for size over the years, as I mentioned. And we have I'll tell you about the Bee Boulevard in a second, but one of those things is looking at native salt grass and trying to have a low growing, low maintenance type of native grass that is tolerant of all the salt that we will apply through the winter months for safe road conditions. So it has to be pretty hardy and non-irrigated. So we've been taking some of the salt grass and propagating it around the city. And then looking at more of a flowering component, we, with a project we call the Bee Boulevard, we actually partnered with parks and with community groups, scientists and schools to introduce a bunch of bee habitat to the edge of one of our boulevards, and then flowering species in the center median of the boulevard. So it's pretty fun having the kids involved and crews installing rock gardens and bee beds and interpretive elements to this. But it was all about trying to build better structural habitat for bees and foraging habitat for bees. As I mentioned, we've drawn on work going on across Canada and indeed around the world, well aware of the experience in the US with changes in recent years in roadside management, and looking at to introduce more pollinator habitat roadsides and utility corridors and the like. We're also aware of the potential benefits for having with carbon sequestration. So turfgrass is a very shallow root system, And so we are quite interested in learning a bit more about the actual processes that go on with the capture of atmospheric CO2 and getting that into the ground in carbon and mineralized and immobilized underground in the root systems and in the soil compounds. Looking at turfgrass compared to native grasses that would otherwise grow around our area, we're highly aware that turfgrass really doesn't contribute much in terms of carbon sequestration or deep rooting depth for soil stabilization and that kind of thing. It does have good uniform coverage, but we're quite interested in other aspects of native plants. Why now? The City of Calgary, as I mentioned, has really toyed with this idea of naturalization only recently. About 20 years ago, we had talked about doing it, and before my time, but we looked back in the records, and it just didn't have the support at the time. People didn't want anything different from the golf course-like conditions along the roadways then. But our current priorities really are about a healthy and green city, and a well-run city, including our finances. We're really trying to find savings wherever we can, and we thought that if we could have the added benefits of reduced maintenance, reduced effort, but higher biodiversity, that would be a win-win for us. So I'll just tell you a bit more about the background on this before I get into the actual project we're doing. In the Canyon Meadows B Boulevard that I'd showed in a previous slide, we actually, for the first time, identified the gypsy cuckoo bumblebee, which is on our Species at Risk Act list as endangered. It's pictured in the bottom right there. And there are two other listed species, the yellow-banded bumblebee and the western bumblebee. So with 3 bees in decline in Canada and in our area, we understand that this is an additional reason to pursue more naturalization in our roadside lands. We went to council with all this reasoning, and they gave us a budget to work with, and from the Innovation Fund to try and look at things doing things a little differently than conventional roadside practice. We were asked to engage with private sector, with public institutions, with the public, and really involve as many people as we could in this. To assess what the conditions would be like if we were to move from our pilot project into doing this at scale around the city, try and better understand what some of the opportunities and constraints are with doing this work. Our success measures for our pilot project were A, we would simply have more data for future decision making. B, we would take this opportunity to raise the ecological literacy of Calgarians and engage them in why we would do this work and how it might go about. And even in doing this pilot project in a 5-hectare area, 10-hectare area, we would be increasing by a percentage point the naturalized open space in the city. So the area we chose, as I mentioned earlier, that yellow line on the second slide, it's a section of Trans-Canada Highway, also called 16th Avenue Northeast. And it's shown in the yellow lines here. You can see that there's a center median for this 4-lane highway. And then there are side area median. And we would be planting mostly on the sides of the roads, also experimenting with that salt grass in the center median. And then the blue line shows sort of a fence line at the top of berm, separating this corridor from the adjacent communities to the north and south. This is a view down the fence line. So to the left is the Trans-Canada Highway with the existing grasses there, a lot of smooth brome. And on the right-hand side, this is on the community side of the berm, and it is landscaped, treed, and mowed grass. And the fence is a nice sort of barrier between work that goes on in the road right of way and community residents. They can look through, see what's going on there. We've engaged them with signage to date, and we're hoping to engage them in some bee garden type projects on the community side of the fence as we go forward with this project. The pilot project involves this turfgrass conversion to an urban meadow in the area that I've described, but it also has a broader scope. We're looking at not just the treatment we're doing, but also areas that we're currently planning future road developments in, and areas around the city where we have actually done some smaller trials and pilots in the past. And so throughout the city, we have areas where, for various reasons, steep slopes and other, we haven't mowed for 15 years. And we can learn from those. We can get an understanding of what kind of weed control we typically, what kind of effort we put into those areas, what kind of cost, what's growing there now. We're looking at bee and floral relations and trying to understand, for areas that we've managed differently in the past, and for an area we're actively managing right now, what kinds of changes and conditions can we expect with this, and at what cost? One of the parts I mentioned, a big element of our work is really to engage public on this. And so we can point to the 4 different quadrants of our city. In the northwest, an area of existing low maintenance regime, which is mostly natural plants. In the northeast, in the southeast and southwest, we can show images. We're actually going to put up signage in these areas just to attract the interest of drivers to say, this is what natural looks like, so that there is an opportunity to engage people in tangible future conditions, as opposed to describing what it might look like. We have evidence already of what it does look like with a different maintenance regime than we have in 90% of our roadways. Mowing, that is. We're partnered with the University of Calgary. We have prairie restoration specialists and zoologists involved in study design and monitoring of changes over time. I'll draw your attention to this study here, a native bee fauna and its floral relations, led by Dr. Mindy Summers. So last year they looked at various plants, target plants in our park areas, and they identified 82 different bee species on the target plants, and they identified which of those plants have the highest abundance of bees and richness of bee species. So drum roll, please. Fireweed in there on the target list anyway. Fireweed was shown to be really attractive to bees. Asters, shrubby cinquefoil, goldenrod, and wild bergamot. So we've incorporated some of these species into our project as well. And as we go, as we get the work underway this year, Dr. Summers' team will be doing their bee floral relation study, including some of our roadside sites, and also looking at not just the native species of interest to us and on our seed mixes, but also some of the non-native species as well. Just to give you a sense for the seed mixes, we developed seed mixes for roadside areas, seed mix B, which are a little more resistant to salt and compact conditions. And then for most of the setback, 20 to 30 meters from road edge on the upper slopes, that's seed mix A. So these are mostly native species with some, so both grass and flower species, and then with a few cover crops that are non-native, just to get things going while the native seed gets established over 2 or 3 years. A Brilliant cedar pictured here, the kind of equipment we expect to be using on the site. So for in the design, we had to first understand what kind of plant community is there now, what weed composition. We've established some ecological reference sites. We've done some soil sampling to understand the growing conditions there. And then, of course, all the standard things you want to consider in setting up a project like this. We went through this in the past 2 years. We got a budget for the work that I described to you. And we have a plan for control of weeds, some pre-treatment and some treatment throughout the project. And we're trying to establish plants that have the best chance of success. The idea here being that we've got a 5-hectare area, so 5 soccer fields of land along the length of both sides of Trans-Canada Highway. And we're going to try and see whether or not we can get things established in the next few years there, and then consider taking this, citywide and scale, change in policy and practice in the future over an area that's about 1,000 hectares or 1,000 soccer fields. So we want to have the best chance of success in this work here. And so for project execution, We've got a contractor coming on board and getting the work underway in May. And we'll be doing a spring plant, and we'll have ongoing maintenance of the site, weed control, and starting in May also our stakeholder engagement starting in earnest. So I mentioned this is looking at potential changes for our policy and practice citywide. And the success measures we had in our pilot project were about engaging the public, about increasing a naturalized open space, and having more information for decision making. But operationally, that information for decision making really comes down to a number of things. It's not just about trying to make it better for bees and increase biodiversity and lower costs. There's a whole bunch of considerations that right-of-way managers are familiar with. First and foremost, I think we have to ensure safe driving conditions in terms of height of the vegetation, sight lines, and debris that can end up on the roadway. We've got legal obligations under our Alberta Weed Control Act. So for prohibited noxious weeds, we must eradicate those, control other noxious weeds. Asset protection, grass fire risks, aesthetics, all considerations we have to think about as we go forward with this. Key risks and opportunities we identify are public education, a great opportunity for us to engage the public and why we would look at doing this. It was a key recommendation coming from other cities too, who are a little more advanced than us. Make sure you have enough budget and enough effort to engage people and tell them why you're doing what you're doing. But we're also quite interested in whether there's potential cost savings. And I think that probably everyone knows that the biggest challenge really is weed control. The plants of Eurasian origin like to stick together, and when you have Eurasian Kentucky bluegrass, it prefers to hang out with Eurasian weeds. We're trying to do a regime change here and get native grasses and flowers established, and it's not easy to do when there's so much weed seed. So that's eyes wide open going into the project on the weed control plan. So ultimately, we're looking at drought resistant, lower maintenance landscaping, increased carbon sequestration, and the biodiversity benefits with native plants, insects associated with those, pollinators and birds that feed on them. This is the sign we have in our project area. Please be patient. Calgary is a bee city. We're quite excited about the possibilities this brings. So thank you for your time. I hope I've given you some insight into what we're doing. It's early innings yet. I hope to present back to the Canadian Wildlife Federation in the coming years on how the project has rolled out.
Is we will move on to Brian Reid. Brian is from the Samuel Wilmot Nature Area through the municipality of Clarington, and he's going to share us a little bit more about the project that they have been working on. So pass things over to you, Brian.
One second.
We can hear you great, so that's good.
Just trying to get the video started here.
No problem. If you just go to slideshow at the top of the screen, the slideshow button.
Yes, where are we here? It's missing for some reason or other.
Right at the top in the middle.
Where it normally is.
If you just run your cursor right to the, yeah, there you go. Right just above, if you click that.
Whoop.
Oh.
Hang on, back again.
So if you just go to the top of where you were before to slideshow.
There is no slideshow icon here for some reason or other.
So also at the bottom of the page on the bottom right, there's like a little plus and minus button. There's also a screen button where you can press play. Oh, Brian, what we can do is I'm happy to share my screen for you as well.
If you have it, that's why.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay, that's fine. If you
Okay.
can, and will I be able to scroll from here or just tell you?
You can just give me a cue and I'll go through the slide for you.
Well, that's very unfortunate, but okay. That.
Okay, so just a moment.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part
Oh,
of
we're so
this.
happy to have you. It's just taking a moment to load on my side, but we'll be
Yes.
set to go in just a minute. There we go. Okay.
Okay. You move right to the second one if you like.
Okay, just have to stop sharing your screen here and then I'll share mine.
There we are. Very quickly, the Samuel Wilmot Nature Area is a 77 hectare or approximately 200 acre parcel of land located in the southwest corner of the community of Newcastle, Ontario, Newcastle being part of the larger municipality of Clarington, which in turn is part of the region of Durham. And the nature area is located about an hour and 20 minutes east of Toronto. It is owned by the municipality of Clarington. The committee of volunteers that I chair is a committee of the Council of Clarington who are authorized to manage or provide advice and guidance and so on to the municipality to operate the nature area itself. So our responsibilities include everything from trail maintenance and litter pickup to hosting educational events and embarking on projects such as we're going to be talking about today. Now, Victoria has asked me to frame my remarks this afternoon around some very specific questions. The first of which was, how does this particular initiative complement other Monarch related activities in the municipality of Clarington? Well, habitat restoration and maintenance has always been part of the mandate of our committee. And to that end, if you go to the next slide, please, we have planted literally hundreds of native shrubs and trees over the years to augment the habitat that is there now. Next slide, please. We've also added bird boxes. We now maintain 75 of these. And in fact, after this meeting this afternoon, I'm going to go down and start cleaning them out to make room for this year's new nestings. And next slide, please. We've also installed butterfly boxes and more recently bat houses. So the whole idea of habitat restoration has been part of what we've been doing for a long time. But a major focus for us over the past several years has been on habitat restoration as it relates to monarch butterflies. And we've now, in fact, expanded that mandate to include pollinators in general. Would you go to the next slide? It started really in August of 2016. What you're looking at there is a headline from a local newspaper early in 2017. Late in 2016, our committee approached the municipality of Clarington and asked if it would consider becoming part of the Mayor's Monarch Butterfly Pledge. Now, many of you may be familiar with that. It's an international initiative that was sponsored by the National Wildlife Federation in the US, and it aims at encouraging municipalities throughout North America to take steps to improve habitat for monarch butterflies and generally mitigate the damage that has occurred due to habitat loss and so on over the years. Well, to our surprise and delight, the municipality jumped on it and signed that pledge almost immediately. And I'm proud to say that we were one of, I believe at the time, only 6 municipalities in Canada to have done that. And 2 others were right here in the Durham region as well. I think Lindsay is aware of what I'm talking about. Our group, the Nature Area Advisory Committee, was asked to basically flesh this whole initiative out by embarking on various activities to give life to that pledge. Next one, please. So the first thing that we did was we organized a public event held in April of 2017 on the general subject of monarch butterflies, highlighting everything from their unique physiology, their migration patterns, their declining numbers, things that the public can do to help, and what have you. You can see some of the things near the bottom of that screen that show the subjects that we covered there. Next screen, please. And we made sure that the presentation itself was what I would call family friendly and interesting. The event was very, very well attended and by a cross section of age groups. So a lot of young people there as well, which is the target audience that we had very much in mind when we set this up. Next one, please. Shortly after this presentation, and we announced this at the previous meeting. No, back one more. Oh, you're going, there we are. Shortly after that initial presentation, we held our first annual planting project. And we focused, as you can see, specifically on milkweed planting at that time. The planting took place along a stretch of municipally owned property adjacent to our nature area. So in that first year, as I said, we concentrated on planting milkweed, but we've expanded since that time to include a variety of butterfly-friendly plants. Next slide. So that was one poster that we used to advertise what we were doing in 2019 as an example. So we broadened the scope there. Now, interesting to hear, everybody seems to be involved in or have OPG involvement in their projects, so we were no exception. They provided us with the funding to purchase large quantities of these wildflowers, and we sourced them locally and we planted them as a community project under our direction. And we did that for 3 years, but we weren't able to do so in 2020 because of COVID. However, we are planning to do it again this May, even if it means doing it entirely on our own or in small family units, perhaps working in shifts. So at this point, we've planted more than 1,200 native plants in that one area alone. Next, please. Every September, since we undertook that initial planting, we've also held a monarch butterfly tagging event in the same location as the plantings. And this has proven to be just a tremendous success with a very high level of community participation. The community actually looks forward to it virtually every year. Can you show the next one, please? Just a small sample of the crowd. Interestingly enough, you see the chap holding the camera there. A documentary film crew from the US happened to be in the Durham region at that particular time, and they saw a notice about our event on our Facebook page, contacted me and asked if they could come and do some filming. So at some point this year, we should be part of a film that they are doing, tracing this kind of initiative and others relating to monarch butterflies all across North America. So that was a rather fortuitous thing that just fell in our laps. Next slide, please. The highlight of this, of course, has been the degree to which the young people have really embraced this. We've had very high turnouts of young families and their children, and this has been just a great boon to the whole project. To date, and this is the third, we've done it 3 years now, we've tagged approximately 1,400 monarch butterflies, many of which have been recovered in Mexico. Now, Victoria also asked me to address, how did we choose the particular site that we chose for the development of our 1 acre monarch or pollinator garden. We did so by involving some of the people on our own committee and staff, because we didn't necessarily have the expertise ourselves, but we back it up a little further. As I mentioned earlier, the current initiative is really a continuation of what we've been doing for a number of years. And so we're always on the lookout for programs related to our overall mandate and focus. And we became aware of a program back in 2019 offered by Wildlife Preservation Canada to support the creation of a wildflower garden. We applied and we were delighted that we were selected as one of the very few recipients of that grant. So we sourced the seed and then identified the best sites within the bounds of the nature area. And to that end, can you show me the next slide, please? This is an overview of the area itself. I don't think my cursor will show, but it's in the bottom left corner. You may see the little blue dot, which signals the viewing machine and so on. There's a platform there. Well, it's the area immediately north of that. There's a 1 acre parcel of land that we have used or designated as the site for the pollinator garden. How we chose that site was done by a staff representative that we had, who's a landscape architect by training, and by one of our own committee members who is a biology professor at Trent University. And then there were a couple of members like myself who just basically served as gophers in all of this. It should be noted that the area that we chose already had a healthy amount of natural milkweed and goldenrod in the vicinity, and it was previously used as farmland dating back to the 1800s, so it was clearly suitable for cultivation. So we measured it off and we taped it off and we installed signage so that the public would know what we were doing. The next question that Victoria asked me to address was, what was or is required to prepare the seed and to maintain the plot, and what challenges and learning outcomes did we have? Well, some of them have already been addressed by the first two presenters. The first very practical challenge for us, of course, was cultivating a 1 acre parcel of meadowland and actually sowing the seed. We learned very quickly that the municipality itself did not have the appropriate equipment to do this for us. And to cultivate and seed it by hand would have been a rather daunting task and probably would not have been very effective. But fortunately, one of our committee members was able to connect with a local agribusiness person, and he volunteered his time and equipment to undertake that task for us. Next slide, please. The last question I was asked to address was about the role of the community in all of this. And for me, the community is key. And for them to play a key role, the community has to know what it is that you're trying to do and why. And earlier I spoke about the first presentation that we held. Well, we made sure then, and in everything we've done since, that the public was aware of what we were doing. And we've used our blog, our Facebook page, local media, catchy signage, posting it in various places where people congregate, such as recreation centers, libraries, and so on, all to promote our planting and tagging events. We've participated in various environment-related events put on by other organizations and talk about the Monarch program that we're involved with as part of that. We even gathered and gave away milkweed seeds at a horticultural society event. Next slide, if you would, please. So here we are talking to people about monarchs and giving away some of the milkweed seed, encouraging people to plant it in their own gardens and so on. And this next point is very important. We also worked with 2 local schools by providing them with milkweed seeds and seed trays and potting soil. We did this to several primary classes who actually grew the seeds in their classrooms as part of their curriculum. And then we arranged for them to visit the nature area and plant them. Next slide, please. And that was done in a different area from that earlier planting I spoke about, but it's still getting the job done in a broader area and involving the young kids in a way that they really seem to enjoy. Next slide, please. I was asked to talk about best practices or some of the things that we've learned. There's no substitute for promoting what it is that you are doing. We've done that through social media, as I said, to catchy signage and so on. Next slide, please. Oh, 2. Oh, you have a slightly different version than I do. That's right. Just back that up if you would. No, that's okay. Leave it right there. That's fine. So promotion is really very important. Involving the community, and when I say involving them, we're talking about in actual implementation of things such as the planting and tagging. There's no substitute for having some hands-on stake in what you were trying to accomplish there. Somebody in a previous presentation talked about using contacts and so on. We all have different networks that we can tap into, and it doesn't take very much sometimes to encourage people to come forward and offer their services or expertise in ways that can really complement what it is you're trying to do. In our case, for example, we were able to borrow nets for the tagging event from the Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority and from the Biology Department at Trent University. One simple example. Another is, I had a contact in the local Lions Club. I contacted that person and said, may I come and make a presentation to you about what we're doing? And they said, by all means. Well, I did that and ended up with a donation that allowed us to purchase another 12 butterfly nets. So everybody uses their own networks and contacts to try to promote what it is that we are doing. Talked also about identifying partners. I used a couple of examples just a moment ago, but very critical to involve your community partners in any initiative like this. Next slide, please. As you work your way through some of these things, you tend to build what I would call a critical mass where things just seem to take on a life of their own. That seems to be the case in terms of the degree to which the community participates in our planning events and looks forward to our tagging events. Once you've done this once or twice, people actually start looking forward to it, and it just builds. More people become involved, makes it easier to go out and get additional support and so on. Very important, nothing terribly profound here, but very important to give credit where credit is due. So for example, the individual who donated his time and equipment to do our cultivation for us was acknowledged publicly at a council meeting recently and given a certificate of appreciation. A little story appeared in the paper thanking him for his efforts. We also thanked him in an article on our blog, that sort of thing. Plus, of course, you publicize in local media every time you have an event such as this, so that people can see again what you're doing and acknowledging the support of volunteers. You should always seek and listen to feedback that is given to you about any of your events. One simple example, the very first time we did a tagging event, it became pretty clear we didn't have enough nets for the number of people that came out. So people were suggesting various places where we could acquire them. We listened to that and went out and took some action on it. So very important to listen to feedback there. Next slide, please. These are the partners that I was referring to earlier. Some of them, as you can see, are service clubs. Several of them are other, what I would call environmental groups. The Durham Region Field Naturalists, for example, is one. An example right there of reaching out to a partner. The first time that we held our tagging events, there were only 3 or 4 of us on the committee who had expertise in tagging. So we reached out to the Durham Field Naturalist group, who had 2 or 3 members who were also experienced at this, and they came out and supported us on that particular day. Just one example of, again, how you tap into your networks to help you with these sorts of things. Next slide, please. That's just a shot of our Facebook page. And the next one, Victoria, is a shot of our Twitter page. Again, don't discount the use of social media to get the word out. Next slide. This is just an aerial view of what is now waiting to bloom. This was completed in November of last year, the actual seeding. The cultivation took place, of course, several times since the fall of 2019. And the seeding took place in November of 2020. And we're hoping that in another couple of months, there'll be a little more color than you see there right now. So those are the things that I wanted to share with you today. I'd like to think that this is an example of how a lot can be done with relatively little. There was no budget for this as such, and virtually everything was done by volunteers. So it wasn't so much an initiative of the municipality as it was an initiative of a group of volunteers who asked the municipality for their support, and we were able to enact it. So that's everything I have, Victoria. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing that with us. I think in particular, I really enjoyed to see how much the community played a role in this project. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pass things over to Lindsay Alward from the City of Oshawa.
Hello, neighbor.
Hi. We're lucky here in Durham Region. We have so many great volunteers. So I'm just going to share my screen. I've been having some trouble. I keep getting kicked off, so I'm not sure if this is going to work.
If it doesn't work, I can share it for you as well.
Okay, did it work?
We're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk to everybody about this project that the City of Oshawa undertook a few years ago. This one's a little bit more specific. We are a city that is trying really hard to support our pollinators, and we've had a few community-driven pollinator gardens in the past, and this one was just a bit more formal and something that we worked pretty hard on. So it's not working if I push that, so I'm just going to push this. So just have a quick agenda. We're going to be talking about how we developed the pollinator site, some of the maintenance challenges that we go through, some of the other challenges, and how this restoration complements some of the other city initiatives that we have going on here in Oshawa. So well, I guess it probably all started back in 2016. We decided that we would like to use this space for a pollinator for a pollinator garden and a meadow. This is a picture of how it looks in the spring after we had to weed it because it was just really contaminated. But this is a picture, the best picture that we have of the bed, and we kind of have some pathways and some little seating areas for rocks. And we hope one day to use it as kind of an educational garden too. So we established this in 2017. That's when we first started planting. And then it of course, it all came back up in 2018. And then there was some maintenance that had to be done. But we planted over 1,600 perennials, 30 shrubs, and 20 trees. We also did a meadow mixed in some of the surrounding areas to kind of get a meadow rehabilitation in the area. We also posted educational signage, hoping that, you know, people will start to learn a little bit more about pollinators when they visit. So the first thing we had was choosing a location. So here we have, this is our, at the time it was called Legend Center, but now it's called the Del Park Homes Community Center. So it's one of our largest recreation centers. It has 4 hockey rinks and, you know, gyms and all of that kind of stuff. It's bordered right next to a school. And as you can see to the east, there is kind of a naturalized area. There's a water course, like a stream going through there. The area to the east is now under development. So we'll see how, you know, things change over time, but we did it in this area right in here. We had an area same as some of the previous presenters that was just kind of a big unutilized area of mown grass. And we saw this as the opportunity to plant a pollinator and do some rehabilitation in the area. So our next step really was, you know, getting the buy-in from the people in recreation, convincing them that no, all of the children are not going to suddenly get, you know, stung by bees, which was actually a concern. So we addressed that with them. We got through all of that. And then we kind of had to move on to creating our site drawings and going through there. So this is just kind of, you know, a drawing that we submitted to get buy-in. As you can see, it's very quite large. So we had this large bed in the middle. We had this other crescent-shaped bed, and then a couple little beds here. This area on the top of the screen is all what we planted with a meadow mix. So that was to encourage naturalization. And we thought if we just keep a mown buffer on either side of the pathway, that, you know, people will understand what this is for. Like a previous presenter, we have the same issues where people here really like mown Kentucky bluegrass everywhere as far as the eyes can see. So we have to really work hard at making sure that we get buy-in from the public, because it's really a big issue. So this was the site drawing that we created based on what we wanted to put in. And then we kind of moved on to a species list. I have our original species list here. I don't know if you can read that, it's really small. But basically we chose a lot of pollinator type plants to attract, you know, bees, butterflies, all of those wonderful things. Some of these species were successful and some of them really were not. And I'll get into that in a minute. I don't know if that's even viewable. So funding, I mean, that's a big thing for us here. I'm sure it's a big thing for a lot of these types of projects. So of course we had to report to council, get council, you know, support. Once we had that, we also needed support from our operations team, because in order for us to do this, we really needed them to do a lot of the work. So we had to make sure that we could get their buy-in before we even proceeded. We looked into grants and partnerships. We ended up getting $23,000 from, it was a CN Eco Connections initiative. It had to do with the Canada 150, but it's through Tree Canada and Communities in Bloom. So once we had the money, on we go to site preparation. So this is where we did use a mix of contracted services and in-house staff. So basically we had the contractor put in the walkways, you know, put in the grade, and then we brought in our own staff to, you know, move the soil and plant all of the million perennials that we bought. So we used a rhododendron I'm sure other municipalities are familiar. It's basically a big rototiller. Then we moved on to the community event. So we enlist the support. Obviously, those are the CN Eco Connects people. And then we had our Aboriginal community do a smudging ceremony. And then we had like some cute kids planting, perennials. And that goes in the paper, and everybody was really supportive and, of that kind of a movement. Unfortunately, it was September. It was the hottest day in the history of the world. So we only planted the one crescent, and we left the rest to our wonderful gardeners to plant. So we got it all in the ground, and everybody was happy. Everybody got their pictures, and then we could kind of start really doing the real work, which was, finishing the rest of the planting and doing, starting to maintain this maintenance-free area. So, that brings me to maintenance. I'm an operations person, so I'm always going to talk about that. We did develop a maintenance plan, considering techniques of maintenance, meadow management, and establishing the desired pollinators. We do, so we asked our staff, like in-house park staff, to be the ones that helped us, establish this garden. And as much as we like to say that these areas are maintenance free, they really are not, especially in the, early years. We had a lot of issues with undesired species kind of choking out what we really wanted. A lot of what we planted was not successful in the first year, unfortunately. A lot of it was catmint, was really sedum, all of these type of things were really successful. More delicate things like Asclepia, we really had a hard time maintaining. Black-eyed Susans, I think you could pretty much grow them everywhere. They were fine. Veronica, like we had a variety of things that worked and a variety of things that didn't. And we found that the next year we had to go in and do quite a bit of maintenance, just pulling out things that we didn't want, that basically were choking out everything that was desired. So that we needed support and we needed help for that. We did get some community engagement. We had a community garden on the same site. So we were able to kind of enlist some of our garden groups to help. But mostly this was done by the park staff, the gardeners really. So that was kind of one of the main, maintenance challenges, was making sure that it established, making sure we're mowing it at the right time, because, you got to make sure that your annuals and your perennials and your seed and your meadow mix grow, not just one or the other. So we did some mowing the next year just to kind of make sure that what we wanted to grow was growing. So that was interesting. And so far so good with the meadow part. Challenges. So yeah, like I said before, some of the pollinator species that we planted were not successful. So what we've really had to do was, we had to make some soil amendments. We had to really just go with what was working. So we kind of replaced a lot of the ones that aren't working with the ones that were successful. And we're really starting to get established. We're really starting to see like a lot of, bees and pollinators. We're into year 3 now. Unfortunately, COVID made things a little bit more challenging, but we're still working with it. Surprisingly, the area was very windy, which caused some issues. So we had to actually plant a little bit of a windscreen of trees to kind of break up the wind as it was coming through that area, because we were finding a lot of our species were just not successful, because that was what the gardeners felt anyway. They're not successful because it was just a constant wind. So I think now we finally got it to the point where we have a species list that is successful in that environment, and it actually looks pretty good right now. The area was very large, so trying to maintain this whole area, just even to get it established, was a lot of work that we didn't necessarily foresee. So we knew we would have to do some work, but the amount of work we had to do pulling the undesired species in the first couple of years was a lot. So if I was planning to do it again, I would probably make better plans to make sure that I had that staff availability. there's also future development coming through the area. So we have to make sure that we always advocate for our garden and, you know, make sure that it stays. People have ideas of putting pathways here or there. So we always have to kind of say, no, this is important and we want to keep it here. We did reduce it a little bit, not too much though. Okay. So how this restoration complements other city initiatives is actually pretty cool. So Oshawa is a bee city, same, I think that's Brian, what you were talking about earlier. So that's where the mayor basically announces that he will make a commitment to pollinators in the future. And so we've made that commitment. So we have like council support through that. Council has also made a commitment to reduce greenhouse gases. So we're always able to kind of say, you know, this is part of that commitment. We're actually developing a naturalization strategy. We had one, but it was from the 80s. So we're updating it now. So this kind of project is really in line with those kind of initiatives. And I actually really appreciated the other presentation about, you know, the kind of things that you're doing on the roadside in Calgary there. We really have a lot of challenges with getting people to understand that just because it's not mown does not mean it's not, you know, doing something favorable for the environment. So working, you know, in that framework, we plan to kind of expand on our naturalization, look at areas of parks that are mown that, you know, maybe they don't need to be. What we're kind of seeing is when you do naturalization that is just kind of letting an area become what they would define as overgrown is really not a good strategy for us. For us, it's more to have mown borders and shapes to our naturalization so they look like part of the landscape. We're of course incorporating all of these strategies into our development standards. So we're, you know, if a park is being redeveloped, we're really aiming to get as much naturalization within that design as we can. And we're working right now through the naturalization strategy to get that verbiage into our standards. So it's not something that we really have to discuss every time. Some of the issues we have here in Oshawa are reduced sightlines that come with naturalization. So we really sometimes get unfavorable activities in some of our green spaces, and we sometimes have to go in and mow just so that people can kind of see into the park. So we feel that if you plan your naturalized areas, that you're really going to have more success in keeping them as years go along, rather than having to just mow them down. We have something really interesting here in Oshawa. We have quite a few. We have 2 universities or 3 universities and two colleges. We have Trent, York, and we have Ontario Tech. So we have a program that's called Teaching Cities, where we work in collaboration with the university and college students to do projects. So around the time of COVID, we had decided that we were going to put in naturalization and bee city commitments to the students to kind of get some of them to put in some ideas and, you know, get the word out to our community. I'm really interested to see where that project goes. I hope that we get some people engaged in it, because, or that, you know, COVID ends one of these days and we can move into doing things the way that we used to. So, I mean, here at Brian, it's hitting pretty hard right now, and we've had to cancel a few of our planting events that we had scheduled. So we're kind of disappointed, but we're going to keep going, keep advocating for outside is best, you know, during these times. But Teaching Cities really allows us to utilize a staff, or not a staff, but a resource of people who are really passionate about this type of subject. So as we move forward, we really plan to enlist them even more in all of these initiatives kind of blended together. So pollinator beds will continue in Oshawa. We have a significant butterfly migration area down by Lakefront West. That's one of the areas that we'll be looking at, kind of how do we go forward. We have a design in the works for down there, but that's being handled through our development team. So it's all about getting these strategies and getting these protocols and getting these standards into every part of what your city produces, right from the community to the operations to the design people. And I think really we're making some headway in all working collaboratively towards these goals. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's really fantastic to see how your habitat restoration on rights of way really fits in with all these other strategies and standards within the city. And I hope that other rights of way managers on this session today can think about how that might work in their own regions. It's really wonderful. And we are going to move along to Renee Roddick from BC Hydro. And I just want to say to everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And if you are able to stay on to see this presentation and for questions and answers at the end, that would be really wonderful. But this session is recorded and it will be going on our webpage as well. So I'm going to pass things on to Renee.
Hi, thanks, Victoria. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Right. I'm hoping that I don't freeze up and turn into a pupa or something like that during my presentation like others have here. And I hope my sound comes through. We'll see how it goes. Maybe
your little bee in the background will be some good luck.
Yeah, I'm hoping. My presentation basically is founded on a story. But prior to doing that, I just have to share one thing with you. My daughter heard I was doing this, and she's a real avid reader and had read something in The Economist this week where with all this vaccination thing going on, I don't know if you're all aware, but honeybee queens vaccinate their offspring to protect them from various pathogens, and I thought that was a pretty cool thing. Okay, so what happened here was kind of not intentional. It's like a lot of you have put together really cool programs or you've planned them out. In my case, no, it was just a great opportunity. In integrated vegetation management, is which I do at BC Hydro, it's generally pretty passive, especially under the rights of way where people will put a garden in or a farm in or use the land for a parking lot or something like that. And we have a properties group that reviews it. We don't usually get involved in steering any of these issues. We just try to help steer them in the right direction. In this case here, we had a site in Richmond, which is where the Vancouver airport is, that looked like it was going to be a real issue for me. One of my first days on the job doing some inspection, I'd run across a crew. The crew was working on a section of our line, much the same as what you see here in the photo.
So Renee, sorry to interrupt, but we can't actually see anything. I don't think the screen's being shared.
Oh crap. Okay, let me go back here.
But you're creating a lovely picture with your words.
The old-fashioned way, right? Hang on a second here. Okay, try this. I knew something was going to go wrong here. Okay. Share screen. Okay, there we go. How about this? I don't know if that's working.
I also have your presentation here and I'm happy to share as well if it's giving you any troubles.
Okay. If I minimize this without losing you. Share sign in. Why don't you just take over there, Victoria?
Not a problem. Okay.
Let me go when you're up. Let me know when you're up there.
Just a moment. Oh. I'm having the issue where I can't click the share. There we go.
Are we up?
Yes, we're up.
Oh, great. So you should see a picture of some tree trimming crews. The second slide.
Yes.
Great. So this is what we do. Keep the branches. We've got to keep an air gap between the electrical system and the trees. We had a site in Richmond, which was upon inspection, I brought the crews down and asked them how things were going, and they said they hated the site. They were there every year. They were trimming these trees back all the time. We were forced to trim them minimally because the city of Richmond needed a green space protection between the industrial customers and the residential customers on either side of the transmission line corridor. And so I came upon the crew, and they said they were getting induction shocks from working there, and they had done it a number of years, and they all hated that site. I said to the city of Richmond staff, well, we've got to do something about this, and spent the next decade or so trying to remove the trees. Came pretty close, but in the meanwhile, I was explaining to them, look at all these guys in this picture have received induction shocks from trimming these pine trees. And you can see a little bit of picture there off of the top left. That's what it looks like when you get what we call electronic pruning. Well, that sort of thing was happening in this site. So they took it to heart, and we spent, like I say, a decade trying to clean things up here and come to a conclusion that we would do a replacement program. We'd take some trees down, and they would accept that as being the kind of thing we could work with them. And as we got closer and closer to a final, you can go to the next slide, a final project, they had another plan come along. So this is the site, an aerial site here. It's very long and fairly narrow corridor. Right. This is what it looks like from the ground. See, it's nothing there except for grass and a bit of a trail through the center. No one uses it. It's just really wasted space, and the city of Richmond mows it every year. We have a 230 kV transmission circuit and a 60 kV circuit as well, parallel to the area. They were approached by a professor from the University of Emily Carr University of Design, and she had a fantastic idea. Meanwhile, we were squibbling and squabbling over which trees should come into the site and what we'd pay for and what they'd pay for, and suddenly this fantastic idea came along that solved a lot of our concerns. So, next slide. They decided that they would create ecological linkages through to the Bath Slough. They thought they'd do something small, but when they heard about our discussions, they realized there's a big opportunity to do something more substantial. And the design changed to accommodate that new issue that we had brought forward. So we were all in. And next slide.
Renee, I just want to double check which slide we should be on.
Oh, tree. I should be on tree removals.
Okay. Let's see here. I think I might be a few behind. There we go. Okay.
So the tree removal, we decided we were going to take down about 120 trees. which was great for us because we got our clearance and allowed the city to mow the area, gain access, allowed our line crews to gain access to work on the conductors and the poles. We took out, we replaced some of the poles, which were due in the next few years to be replaced, but we thought we'd do it earlier so we wouldn't be traipsing over the Pollinator Meadow plan. So anyway, we got going on this in the September time frame, so we could do an early fall planting. We missed that mark a little. The weather was dry and luck was on our side, and we removed 119 trees. Next slide. We also created wildlife trees for habitat for bats, birds, and other animals. And we still left a few trees so that the aesthetics between the commercial operations on the one side and the residents on the other were maintained. Next slide. Are you in the chipping slide now?
Yes, I realized I responded and I was on mute.
This is the chipping slide. Okay, so we chipped all the trees up and hauled chips off, and then realized that we didn't know they wanted a central pathway to be mulched with chips. So next time around, we would have done that and saved everybody some effort. Next slide. Stump ground 27 trees, just to make it a little easier for the mower from the city to access. And it gave us a much better access, as you can see from this this point here. And after clearing, here we go. We've got our a little bit of tree cover on the one side, easy access for our equipment, and safer for our tree trimmers. And next slide. So here's the design. The prof from the University of Emily Carr had decided that this was the perfect spot for her to duplicate a bee wing design using different colors of flowers and a pattern that could be seen from the flyway above. So this is the approach to the Vancouver airport, and she was hoping that passengers would get interested in her project, which was to have them take photographs as they flew in, the winning photograph getting some kind of prize, and again, adding to the dimension of this interesting project that she'd set up. We worked with a local supplier of seeds. We didn't have the seed. I'm really envious, actually, of some of the other presenters here where you've got so many seeds to choose from. We don't have a bountiful amount of seeds on the West Coast here, but we took what we could get, trying to select seeds that were not invasive, which was pretty tough. So let's see here. Go to the next slide. And so the soil was tilled up, and the pathways in the center there. And we worked with City of Richmond to plant the right tree in the right place in the adjacent area. So we would have some trees which would provide some perennial type flowering in with these annual and perennial seed mixes. So we put 50 of these compatible species in, and that was a real chore. I got to tell you, the selection of trees in the Lower Mainland, probably across the country, I guess, is very difficult to find short-growing trees that are compatible with the electrical system. They looked through hundreds of compatible species and found just a few available in any caliper that could survive an urban setting. So that was a big part of the thing, and kudos to Richmond. They spent a lot of time trying to find out what could work under our transmission lines. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. It's our tree replacement plan. We have trees that were put in certain places. Some could grow a little bit taller than others, depending on where they were planted. And we ended up with, again, 10 species that would be appropriate. And there's a photo of some of the right trees. We ended up planting Sidonia oblongata, Malus adirondack, Malus lewisa, Acer campestre carnival, Acer tataricum, Garan hotwings, and Salix campera pendula. Our partners on this part of the project were Emily Carr University, City of Richmond, BC Hydro, of course, West Coast Seeds, which was the seed supplier, Van City, it's a credit union, P&D Bank, Friends of the Environment, Simon Fraser University, a secondary school in the area, and a Kwantlen Farm School. Now, there was a lot of dimension to this project. They'd really thought this out. There were, next one, they wanted to have other initiatives going on as well. So the elementary school, which was nearby, got involved and helped with some of the seed collection, helped with some of the planting. They planted sunflowers in the area. Even one of the groups was involved in collecting seeds for another aspect, which I'll show you shortly. Next slide. Here's the flight path. You can see the this is every two minutes one of these planes goes by. I was there one day to check on the planting. Hadn't seen it yet. I'd been hoping it would be an improvement over what we'd seen before, just this grassy area, which was devoid of bees. There was nothing in advance of this planting. And I got there, a plane flew by, and then the noise stopped, and all I could hear was the buzzing of the bees. It was just unbelievable. There were like thousands and thousands of bees all over the place. So we achieved that milestone. It was great. Okay, next slide, please. We sent one of our transmission crew up into the area, to take some shots. Next slide. This is a 90-foot bucket, and there's our view of the planting. And next slide. There's a bit of a close-up of what was growing at that time. You can see some mustards coming in. We had one problem. Initially, the site was a bit wet, and then throughout the summer, it dried out, and one of the areas had to be planted, unfortunately, with California poppy, which wasn't on our original list and is considered invasive, although it's not a very effective invader. Next slide, please. Here's our flower list. Yellow mustard, sweet alyssum, crimson clover, and phacelia. Next slide. So they collected seeds. For the next year, of course, they did the seeding. They counted bees. They do sweep nets to determine which species were there. Person in the bottom right was the Simon Fraser University professor, Dr. Ellie, who provided a lot of the technical aspects for the bee collection, and super successful here. The bee, I can't remember the bee numbers, but they were phenomenal. Next slide, please. One of the other projects was to put together what we call the Bridgeport B Hotel, and this was for the mason bees, to show there's other bees as well, and a little bit of a description, so anyone walking through the area can learn about these bees as well. Next slide. There's one of the schools planting the sunflowers. Next slide. And here's some school involvement. They made mustard from the mustard plants growing there. Next slide. Of course, we put signage up so everybody is recognized. And we learned a lot about each other. I mean, it was a great partnership, a building partnership here, and we get along great with Richmond. We had we learned to trust each other and to help each other in this process, and I think a lot of our other projects are going really well in the area. And Richmond liked this project so much they built another similar meadow over in an area called Terra Nova. They learned a lot from the issues with maintenance in this one, took it over to the other project area, and again, it made it more successful as well. Next one. And we get great press. There was lots of information, lots of different newspaper outlets in the area took on the articles. I was interviewed, others were as well. Border Free Bees and City of Richmond received the British Columbia Parks and Rec Association Award of Excellence. New Westminster cottoned onto this and thought that would be a great idea. I worked with them on developing one of our fee-owned lands with transmission line, very similar to what the last photos looked like. And so they, while they were waiting for things to get going, they started they owned a little strip of land adjacent to this. And so they started the local residents up, and they planted some of the perennial shrubs, got going on that. They're currently running their planting now, I believe. And I'll have to take a look at that, see how that turned out. Next slide, please. As probably a lot of you are aware, there's different types of pollinators that we're dealing with. Obviously, the honeybees, we have bumblebees, wet bees, mining bees, hairy belly bees, and others like flies, wasps, and butterflies, and beetles, and birds. They're all pollinators and are gaining from these kind of initiatives. Next slide. And here's Dr. Ellie. Her research found that certain types of bees are attracted to certain types of flowers. For example, bumblebees, they're a pretty huge bee. Little tiny flowers don't maybe work that so well for them. So they're blasting into the larger blossoms, trying to get their pollen there. And other bees have other interests. So she provided this, and you can essentially plant for bees. You pick your bee that you want to attract, and put together the list of plants that are available, and you can decide what to do. For example, if you want to help the cuckoo bee, you better pick thyme, aster, or mint. Next slide. Since then, we have a compatible use guideline in the electrical industry, BC Hydro, for rights-of-way use. Farmers come all the time, and city developers, this sort of thing, and use this document. And we've added a section on pollinator corridors there, so anybody can see that we're encouraging this. And in addition to that, this year, we normally provide funding to municipalities who come to us with requests to put the right tree in the right place. Well, now we have an additional option of putting the right pollinator meadow in the right place. And usually they don't have an issue with any of these pollinator plants growing into the transmission lines or any of the electrical system. Next slide, please. So as a result of a lot of this, there's been a lot of nudge effect. I had some press internally. We have an internal newsletter, made some presentations, and as a result of this information, our project managers, our maintenance managers are taking this information and carrying it forward in other ways. So, for example, this is a substation expansion program where we've got a hillside that was created during the expansion, and it needs to be hydroseeded. Normally, we would just run a mix of maybe some clover in with the reclamation mix of grasses. But in this case here, what we're going to do is throw in some wildflower into that, doing the same thing on a very similar project with another substation expansion. Our roads and maintenance group, which manages thousands of kilometers of roads in the Lower Mainland and the hinterlands, is also adding a pollinator blend to their reclamation mix so that we can extend this to other aspects. Next one, please. We have other initiatives now. The City of Delta, which is adjacent to Richmond. The City of Burnaby had come forward and was working on trying to set something up. We've got a few plots in the City of Langley, which is close by to the Vancouver area. Up in Pemberton near Whistler, which you might have heard of. Whistler is a ski resort. They're waiting to develop an area once we raise our towers a little bit, because they've got some other plants they want to put in there as well. So it's catching on, and we're as long as we keep promoting it, as was presented in a couple of the other presentations here, things seem to move along pretty quickly. So if you have any next slide, please. There's some references there. Border-free bees. SFU's got some information. West Coast Seeds about their seeds that they've collected and so on. And then next slide. And so if you need to get a hold of me at any point, you can see my COVID beard, and I'm all set to answer any questions. So that's the end of my show. If he has any questions, I guess we'll deal with those in a little bit later here.
Thank you so much, Renee. I really appreciate that. I know I, for one, next time when I'm able to travel, be keeping my eyes out for that nice aerial view over Richmond there in particular. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. We do have some questions. We've had a number of questions that have been answered through the Q&A function through typing, but we do have a few others that are here. And maybe, Renee, since you were just talking about it, we have someone who just wanted to confirm that you did go ahead and use the Cal Poppy. They are just sharing that they are developing some site-level seed mixes for restoration for Surrey, and they decided not to use poppy at all, even if it isn't that aggressive as an introduced species.
Yeah, they got a little desperate in that one dry spot and decided they'd put the Cal Poppy in. I don't know. I haven't heard about it if it's moved off the site, but we have so few to choose from at this point here. I understand the industry probably will take a while to build up a supply and the variety that we would like to have, but it's very difficult to find something that doesn't have a bit of an invasive component to it.
Mm-hmm. And there's actually another question that was posed to Kathleen and Andy about seeds as well, because I think seeds is something that has come up for everyone as a potential challenge. And there's a question here, Kathleen and Andy. What was involved in sourcing seed from the US in particular? Were there any struggles that were related to the Canada Seeds Act?
Perhaps surprisingly, there were no issues importing native plant seed from the US. So as far as I understand, the Seeds Act really is about crop seeds, wheat, corn, soy, etc. So there's nothing, as far as I know, that regulates native plant seeds. Now, it would be a different question if we were trying to import live plants, but that wasn't the case. And so basically all I had to do was give Ernst a call, and several calls, many calls, many emails and many calls to put together our seed mix. But then, yeah, it just got shipped, and there was some import fee charged, or a customs fee charged at the border. And the only headache was figuring out who was going to pay it, because it was going between Ernst and Pollinator Partnership and OPG, and it wasn't on the invoice and things like that. So just your regular administrative issues.
Okay. And I also just want to pose this question to everyone. Does anyone have anything to share about challenges or maybe successes that they've had with sourcing seeds? It's okay if you don't. I just wanted to check. Okay. And there's another question here, Kathleen and Andy. It was mentioning that your site is flat, but when considering sloped areas adjacent to roadways, is snow or dormant seeding appropriate for those more sloped areas?
Yeah, great question. This is not something I know a lot about, but I know there are quite a few people. There's Stefan Weber in Southwest Ontario, who's done a lot of, his doctoral research is on roadside plantings of native plants. And I'm pretty sure that what he's done, which is fairly common for roadside vegetation management, is to do hydro seeding on slopes. So I'm not sure he would still be able to do that in early winter, but I would suspect so. But yeah, I don't know, other than hydro seeding for slopes.
Okay. And Ethan, I also just wanted to take this time because unfortunately you did get cut off. If there's any last final comments that you wanted to share, I think we got to see the majority of your presentation, but I just want to ensure you got to say everything you wanted to.
The screen went blank and the system shut down on a third to last slide. So I'll just say briefly that we are including 10 roadside sites in our bee plant surveys. Further to Brian's point, we understand what bees are, getting a better understanding of what plants bees like. We are kicking into gear now. We've established baseline conditions. We've done soil surveys. We have some ecological reference sites. We've got our design for the next couple of years of work. And we have, as I mentioned, I think briefly, scientists involved to take this project into the long term. Of course, the nature of pilot projects is that you do them for 2 or 3 years and you don't necessarily sustain them over the long term. So I'm glad to say that by partnering with the scientific community, we hope to have information rolling in for years to come, because of course, native plant establishment is a slow process. And the final, I had a slide showing our actual seed mixes for our roadside areas, and then which are more salt affected, and then our upslope areas. And the key challenges we identified, risks and opportunities, were with communication. People like what they have always enjoyed, these golf course-like conditions along our roadways. So we're very much anticipating some education, some awareness and discussion with stakeholders about what might be acceptable for a different look, for value add in terms of biodiversity. And the other key risk and opportunities around weed control. Not just a matter of sprinkling wildflowers that is going to come up roses. It's a matter of ongoing maintenance of weeds for us, and we going into that with eyes wide open.
Wonderful. And I think I can speak for everyone that I know myself for sure. I'm going to be really looking to you for updates on your projects this summer or in future years for everyone. And I just really want to thank you all for joining us today, for putting together those really, really wonderful presentations. Being able to see the photo really makes things alive. I love that little bee there, Renee, that you're holding up. And thank you to everyone who was able to stay on a little bit longer. And like I said, it's going to be, or it is recorded, and it will be on our webpage. So you can definitely take a look and delve into more of the slides and go back to any parts that maybe you have missed. And just finally want to thank our funders, Ontario Chilean Foundation, for making this workshop possible. So have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much for staying on with us.
Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.